I'm 35, and I've been waiting 6 years for what happened last Friday night. 6 years of watching my brother Tristan climb his corporate ladder while treating me like I'm some kind of family embarrassment. 6 years of my mom June pretending I don't exist at family gatherings unless she needs someone to blame for why Christmas isn't perfect. 6 years of planning exactly what I do when they finally pushed me far enough to justify what I've been preparing. Let me back up because you need the full picture to understand why I walked out of that restaurant smiling while they're probably still trying to figure out what the hell just happened. When I was 29, our dad had a massive stroke. Tristan was in his second year at his finance job, making decent money, but not the empire he's built now. I was finishing my business degree and working part-time at a restaurant. Dad needed round-the-clock care for 8 months. Tristan said he couldn't take time off because he was up for a promotion. Mom said she couldn't handle the physical demands. So I dropped out with 1 semester left, moved back home, and became Dad's full-time caregiver. Dad recovered enough to live independently again, but those 8 months killed my momentum. My restaurant job was gone. My apartment was gone. I had to start over from nothing at 30 years old. I picked up a job delivering packages because it was flexible and paid okay. I waited tables at night. I drove a 2006 Ford van that I bought for $1,200 because it was what I could afford. And my family, especially Tristan, treated this like I'd personally chosen to be a failure instead of sacrificing my own trajectory to keep our father alive. Here's what they don't know. During those 6 years of being treated like garbage, I finished my degree online. I got my real estate license. I started investing every single dollar I could scrape together into properties. Nothing fancy, just small rental units in areas I knew would appreciate. I lived in that van for 8 months to save money. I worked 70-hour weeks between deliveries, restaurant shifts, and managing my growing portfolio. I ate ramen and peanut butter sandwiches while Tristan posted photos of his steakhouse dinners and European vacations. And I did it all quietly because I learned something important about my family. They need someone to look down on. Tristan's entire self-worth is built on being better than me. Mom's social circle feeds on her stories about her successful son and her other son who just can't seem to get it together. Faith, Tristan's wife, came from money, and she loves having someone in the family she can pity. So I let them think exactly what they wanted to think. I drove that rusted van to family events. I wore my delivery uniform. I talked about my restaurant job like it was my only income. And I watched them get more and more comfortable being awful to me. Last Friday, Tristan texted me that he was having a promotion dinner at this upscale steakhouse downtown. He said I should stop by for a drink at the bar around 8. He specifically said, just stop by the bar, don't come to the table unless invited. I knew exactly what this was. This was Tristan wanting to show off his success to his boss and colleagues with me as the cautionary tale sitting nearby. The family disappointment drinking alone at the bar while the golden child celebrated. I almost didn't go. But then I realized this was exactly the opportunity I'd been waiting for. They wanted a show? I'd give them one they'd never forget. I showed up at 8 wearing my delivery uniform and work boots. I sat at the bar nursing a beer. Tristan's table was in the main dining area, visible from the bar. There were about 10 people there, including Mom, Faith, his boss, and several colleagues. I could see them laughing and drinking wine that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget used to. Around 8:30, I saw Tristan stand up. He was clearly drunk holding a wine glass, and he pointed directly at me. His voice carried across the whole restaurant. That's my loser brother. He delivers packages while I close million-dollar deals. Pretty pathetic, right? His whole table turned to look at me. His boss, this guy in an expensive suit, actually laughed and said something about community college failures. I couldn't hear the exact words, but I saw Tristan nodding enthusiastically. Mom did this loud whisper that everyone could hear about not letting me near the check because I'd cry poverty and embarrass them more. Faith smirked and announced to the table that she saw me sleeping in my van at a Walmart parking lot last year. Tristan added that I actually think I'll be successful someday. Still waiting tables at 35. One of his colleagues made some joke about people who peak in high school, except some people never even start. The whole table roared with laughter. The bartender looked at me with this mix of pity and awkwardness. Other diners were staring. The manager was hovering nearby looking uncomfortable but not intervening because Tristan's table was clearly spending serious money. I finished my beer. I put a 20 on the bar. I smiled at the bartender, walked out without saying a single word to anyone. Because here's what they don't know. That steakhouse? I own the building. Not the restaurant, but the building it's in. I bought it 14 months ago as part of a small commercial real estate portfolio. The restaurant has a 5-year lease that comes up for renewal in 8 weeks. The owner has been trying to negotiate an early extension because he wants to lock in his current rate before the neighborhood gets more expensive. I've been stalling on those negotiations. But that's just the beginning. See, when you spend 6 years quietly building something while everyone thinks you're a failure, you learn things, you pay attention. You notice things like how Tristan's fancy promotion came with a massive increase in his fixed costs because he and Faith bought a house that's stretching them thin. You notice that Mom's retirement is smaller than she pretends, and she's been relying on Tristan's generosity to maintain her lifestyle. You notice that Faith's parents are helping with their mortgage, but that help is conditional on maintaining appearances. And you prepare. You make connections. You position yourself. You wait for exactly the right moment. I got home around 9:30. I poured myself a real drink, not the cheap beer I pretended to struggle with at the bar. I opened my laptop and started making calls. First to the restaurant owner, then to a few other people. Then I sent some very specific text messages. By 10:30, I'd set several things in motion that my family doesn't even know are possible yet. I'm not going to lie, part of me wanted to march back into that restaurant and tell them everything right there. But I've learned patience. I've learned that revenge isn't about the immediate satisfaction. It's about the slow realization of what they've done and what they've lost. My phone started ringing around 11. First Faith, then Mom, then Tristan. I didn't answer. I let them go to voicemail. Faith's message was panicked, asking me to call her back immediately. Mom's was angry, demanding to know what I'd done. Tristan's was confused and aggressive, saying, I better not be playing games. I deleted all three without listening to them completely. Around midnight, someone started pounding on my apartment door. Multiple voices. I could hear Tristan shouting my name. Faith was saying something I couldn't make out. Mom was demanding I open the door. They were all there. At midnight. At my apartment they've never even bothered to visit before. I turned off my lights and went to bed. The pounding continued for almost 20 minutes before my neighbor threatened to call the police and they finally left. I slept better than I have in 6 years. Update 1. Holy hell. The response to my first post was overwhelming. A lot of you asked what I set in motion that night and why my family showed up at my door losing their minds. Buckle up, because this gets so much better and worse at the same time. Saturday morning I woke up to 47 missed calls. 47. Tristan called 23 times. Faith called 16 times. Mom called 8 times. My phone was basically having a seizure on my nightstand. I made coffee, opened my laptop, and checked my emails before I even thought about dealing with them. The restaurant owner had responded to my message from Friday night. He was panicking because I told him I needed to discuss immediate changes to our lease arrangement and suggested we meet Monday morning. I'd also mentioned that I was reconsidering my position on several properties in the downtown area and might be consolidating my holdings. For context, this guy has been desperately trying to extend his lease early because he knows the neighborhood is blowing up. His current rate is locked in at about 40% below market value. If I don't renew, he either pays current market rates, which would destroy his profit margins, or he has to move his entire operation. But here's the thing that made Friday night even better. Tristan's boss, the guy who laughed about community college failures, is the restaurant owner's silent partner. He invested heavily 2 years ago because the location was supposed to be a guaranteed moneymaker, which means Tristan's boss has a significant financial stake in keeping that lease at its current rate. I didn't know this when I bought the building. I found out about 8 months ago when I was reviewing some partnership documents. And I've been sitting on this information waiting for the perfect moment to use it. Around 10 Saturday morning, someone started banging on my door again. I looked through the peephole and saw all three of them. Tristan looked like he hadn't slept. Faith was in yoga pants and a sweatshirt, which for her is basically admitting defeat because that woman doesn't leave her house without a full face of makeup normally. Mom had this expression like she was ready to murder someone. I opened the door but left the chain on. Tristan immediately started trying to push through, asking what the hell I'd done. I just stood there looking at him until he stopped pushing. Then I asked if they were going to apologize for Friday night, or if this was another ambush situation. Mom tried the sweet voice thing, asking if we could please come inside and talk like adults. I reminded her that adults don't publicly humiliate their family members at restaurants and then show up unannounced at midnight. Faith cut in, saying they wouldn't have had to come at midnight if I'd answered my phone like a normal person. I asked what emergency required all three of them to come to my door at midnight instead of waiting until morning. None of them had an answer for that. Tristan finally said they needed to know what I told the restaurant owner. I asked why he would possibly care what I discussed with the owner of the restaurant where he had dinner. That's when Faith blurted out that Tristan's boss called him at 11 Friday night, absolutely furious. Turns out, the restaurant owner called Tristan's boss right after I messaged him. The boss then called Tristan wanting to know what the hell happened at dinner that made the building owner suddenly reconsider the lease situation. Tristan apparently tried to play dumb, but his boss wasn't having it. The boss told Tristan that if his family drama cost them that restaurant location, Tristan's promotion might be reconsidered. I let that information just hang there for a minute. Tristan was staring at me with this mix of panic and rage. He said I needed to call the restaurant owner and tell him everything was fine. I asked why I would do that. He said because I was trying to sabotage his career over a stupid joke at dinner. A stupid joke. Those were his actual words. 6 years of treating me like garbage, and he called Friday night a stupid joke. I told him to leave. He said we weren't done talking. I said yes, we absolutely were done, and if he didn't leave, I'd call the police. Mom tried to intervene, saying I was being unreasonable and we're family and family works things out. I asked where that family energy was when Tristan was performing his comedy routine for his colleagues. Where was family when Faith was telling everyone about seeing me sleep in my van? Where was family when Mom loudly discussed my finances at a crowded restaurant? Faith tried a different approach. She said they were all drunk and things got out of hand, and if I'd just joined them for breakfast, we could sort this out. I asked if this apology breakfast would be before or after I fixed Tristan's work problem. She didn't answer. Tristan said I was being petty and vindictive, and this was exactly why nobody in the family respected me. So I told them, right there in my doorway. I told them I own that building. I told them I've been building a real estate portfolio for 6 years. I told them every single assumption they'd made about my life was wrong, and I'd let them believe it because I wanted to see exactly how low they'd go. The looks on their faces were worth 6 years of humiliation. Tristan went completely pale. Faith's mouth literally fell open. Mom looked like she was trying to do math in her head and couldn't make it work. Tristan recovered first and tried to spin it like he knew all along that I was doing well, that he was proud of me, that Friday was just him being drunk and stupid. I reminded him that he'd been treating me like garbage for 6 years, not just Friday night. He said I was exaggerating and being sensitive, that our family always gives each other a hard time and I needed to stop acting like a victim. I asked him to name one time in 6 years he'd given me credit for anything. One time he'd acknowledged what I did for Dad. One time he'd treated me like an equal instead of a punchline. He just stood there. Faith tried to say that I never told them about my real estate business, so how were they supposed to know? I asked why they assumed I was failing instead of asking questions. Why they needed someone to look down on so badly that they never once considered I might be doing fine. Mom said I was making this bigger than it needed to be, and if I just fixed things with the restaurant owner, we could move past this. I told her there was nothing to fix. I was having a standard business discussion with a tenant about lease terms. If that happened to affect Tristan's work situation, maybe Tristan should have thought about that before making me the entertainment at his promotion dinner. Tristan completely lost it then. He started yelling about how I was using some petty revenge scheme to ruin his career, how I was pathetic and jealous, and this just proved I was the loser he always said I was. Faith was pulling on his arm trying to get him to calm down. Mom was saying this was getting out of hand and I needed to fix this right now. I asked Tristan if he remembered the 8 months I spent taking care of Dad while he was too busy being important. He said that had nothing to do with this. I said it had everything to do with this. I sacrificed my own momentum so Dad wouldn't die alone, and nobody in this family has ever once acknowledged that. Instead, you've spent 6 years using my situation as proof that you're better than me. Faith said I was twisting things and making them sound worse than they were. I asked if she was twisting things when she told Tristan's colleagues about my van. She said she was just making conversation and didn't mean anything by it. I asked how she'd feel if I started making conversation about how her parents pay half their mortgage. Her face went red and she told me that was private family business. I said so was my living situation, but that didn't stop her from broadcasting it to a restaurant full of strangers. Mom tried one more time to mediate, saying we all needed to calm down and talk this through rationally. I told her I was perfectly calm and had been rational for 6 years while they treated me like garbage. Tristan said if I didn't fix this with his boss, they were done with me. Like I should be scared of losing them. I told him I'd been waiting for him to say that for 6 years and closed the door. They stood outside yelling for another few minutes before finally leaving. I watched from my window as they had what looked like a major argument in the parking lot. Faith was gesturing wildly. Mom looked upset. Tristan kept pointing back at my building. Monday morning, I met with the restaurant owner at a diner across town because I wanted neutral territory, and I definitely wasn't meeting at a coffee shop after that disaster. He showed up looking stressed and immediately started asking what he'd done wrong. I told him he hadn't done anything wrong and that I was simply reconsidering some of my properties in that area. He asked if this was about Friday night and if something happened with the party that was there. I didn't answer directly, but I asked him how well he knew his business partner. He said they had a good relationship and the partnership was solid. I asked if his partner had ever mentioned having connections to anyone dining there Friday. He got very quiet and asked if I meant the group that was celebrating. I said I'd noticed his partner seemed to have a relationship with someone at that table. He admitted that his partner was very invested in keeping certain clients happy and sometimes hosted dinners for business associates. He asked if there was a problem with that arrangement. I said not necessarily, but I wanted to ensure our business relationship was independent of his partner's other connections. He understood what I meant and got very nervous. I told him I'd be in touch about the lease renewal and left it at that. He tried to ask more questions, but I said I needed time to review my options. I could see him mentally calculating how much it would cost to relocate or pay market rates. The thing is, I'm not actually trying to destroy the restaurant, but I need Tristan's boss to sweat. I need him to realize that his investment is vulnerable because of Tristan's behavior. And I need Tristan to understand that his actions have consequences that extend beyond our family drama. Tuesday afternoon, Faith showed up at my apartment alone. She was dressed normally again, which meant she'd recovered from the weekend shock. She asked if we could please talk without Tristan and without the drama. I was curious enough to let her in. She sat on my couch and did this whole speech about how she understood I was hurt and how she realized she'd been insensitive and how family dynamics can be complicated. I just listened. Then she got to the real point. She said Tristan's boss had been calling him multiple times a day demanding updates on the restaurant situation. Tristan's promotion was officially on hold, and Faith's parents were asking questions about why there was suddenly tension. I asked why Faith's parents were asking questions. She admitted that they'd mentioned the steakhouse dinner to her mother, and her mother was confused about some things that were said. Apparently, Faith's mom knows exactly which downtown buildings I own because she's on some neighborhood business association board. Faith's mom had called Sunday asking why Faith didn't mention that I own the building where they had dinner. So now Faith's family knows that Faith and Tristan were mocking me while sitting in a building I own. And Faith's parents, who are helping with their mortgage, are not impressed. Faith said her mother made some comments about respecting people regardless of their circumstances and how appearances can be deceiving, which in wealthy parent language apparently means we're disappointed in you. Faith asked me what it would take to make this right. I asked what she thought would make it right. She suggested maybe we could have a family dinner and clear the air, and I could reassure the restaurant owner that everything was fine. I asked if this family dinner would include an actual apology. She said of course they'd apologize, but I needed to understand that Tristan was under a lot of pressure and sometimes he gets competitive and says things he doesn't mean. I told her that 6 years of consistent behavior isn't about pressure, it's about character. She said I was being unforgiving and holding on to grudges. I reminded her that 3 days ago she was smirking about my living situation to strangers, and now she was asking for forgiveness. She said she was trying to fix things and I wasn't making it easy. I asked her point blank why she thought I should make it easy. She didn't have an answer. She just kept saying that we're family, and this was getting out of hand, and couldn't I see that I was hurting people? I asked if she could see that she'd been hurting me for years. She said it wasn't the same thing because they didn't know I was actually doing well. Like that made it okay. Faith left looking frustrated and angry. She said I'd regret being this stubborn. I told her I'd survived 6 years of their disrespect, so I'd probably survive her threats. Wednesday, Tristan started texting me directly, not calling, which told me he'd been advised to have written records or he was trying to control his anger or both. His messages were a weird mix of apologetic and demanding. He'd send something about how he didn't realize how much he'd hurt me, followed by something about how I needed to stop punishing him for past mistakes, about how family should support each other, followed by reminders of everything he did for the family, about how he wanted to make things right, followed by accusations that I was enjoying this too much. I didn't respond to any of them. Each message was just more evidence that he fundamentally didn't understand what he'd done wrong. He was sorry he got caught. He was sorry there were consequences. But he wasn't actually sorry for 6 years of making me feel worthless. Thursday, Mom called from a number I didn't recognize, probably because she knew I was ignoring her usual number. She asked if we could meet somewhere to talk. I asked if Tristan would be there. She said no, just the two of us. I agreed to meet her at a grocery store parking lot Friday morning because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that public locations keep people from completely losing it. But here's where things got more complicated. Thursday night, I got a message from Faith's mother, Lila. We'd met a handful of times at family events, but never had a real conversation. She said she'd gotten my number from the business association directory and hoped I didn't mind her reaching out directly. She wanted to meet for lunch to discuss a potential business opportunity from Faith's mother. 2 days after Faith tried to get me to fix things with the restaurant owner. I have no idea if this is legitimate or if this is some kind of setup, But I agreed to meet her Saturday because honestly, I'm curious what angle they're playing now. So tomorrow, I'm meeting with Mom. Saturday with Faith's mother. The restaurant owner is still waiting for my decision on the lease. Tristan's promotion is in limbo, and my family is fracturing in real time. The thing is, I'm not even doing anything particularly dramatic. I'm just stopping the free pass they've had for 6 years. I'm just treating them the way they've been treating me, like their problems aren't my responsibility, and they absolutely cannot handle it. Some of you commented that I should just cut them off completely. Trust me, that's where this is heading. But I need them to fully understand what they've lost first. I need them to see exactly who I am and what I've built, and then watch it all become completely unavailable to them. Not because I'm cruel, but because they earned this. More updates coming after my meetings. This is far from over. Update 2. The comments on my last post were split between people saying I'm a genius and people saying I need to just move on. To the second group, I get it. But you're missing the point. This isn't about moving on. This is about making sure they understand exactly what they did and what it cost them. Moving on would mean they get to keep thinking their behavior was acceptable. Friday morning, I met Mom at the grocery store parking lot like we'd agreed. She showed up 10 minutes early, which immediately told me she'd been planning what to say. She got in my car because it was cold, and she said we needed privacy. I didn't start the conversation. I just waited. If she wanted this meeting, she could explain why. She started with the whole speech about how she'd been thinking a lot about Friday night and how things got out of hand. How she could see now that maybe they'd been too hard on me over the years. How she never realized I was struggling so much with being compared to Tristan. I stopped her right there and told her I wasn't struggling with anything. I'd been building a business while they were busy using me as their punchline. She did this thing where she got quiet and nodded like she was really absorbing what I said, but I could tell she was just waiting for her turn to talk. Then she said that regardless of who was right or wrong about the past, we needed to focus on the present situation. She said Tristan was really struggling with work stress, and this thing with his boss was making it worse. She said Faith was caught between her husband and her parents, and it was putting a strain on their marriage. And she said watching her sons fight like this was breaking her heart. I asked her where her broken heart was when I was sleeping in my van. Where was her concern when I was working 70-hour weeks just to survive? Where was her impulse to protect me when Tristan was performing for his colleagues at my expense? She said she didn't know things were that hard for me because I never told her. I reminded her that she never asked. She said I always seemed fine and handled things on my own, so she assumed I preferred it that way. That's when I realized something. Mom genuinely believes that because I didn't complain, I must have been okay. Like struggling silently means you're not actually struggling. Like being private about your problems means you don't deserve support. She'd built this whole narrative where my independence was a choice rather than a necessity because nobody offered to help. I told her that independence isn't the same as preference. That just because I could handle things alone doesn't mean I should have had to. That Tristan got help with everything, got praise for everything, got the benefit of every doubt while I got criticism for surviving. She tried to say that wasn't true, but I could see her running through memories and realizing it absolutely was true. She switched tactics and asked what I wanted from all this. If I wanted an apology, they'd apologize properly. If I wanted acknowledgement, they'd acknowledge everything publicly. If I wanted to be included more in family events, they'd make sure I felt welcome. I asked what I wanted. I wanted the last 6 years back. I wanted to not have spent my father's recovery being treated like I was too incompetent to help when I was the only one who showed up. I wanted to not have been the family embarrassment when I was building something real. But since I couldn't have any of that, what I wanted now was for them to feel exactly as small as they'd made me feel. Mom actually looked hurt by that. She said I was being vindictive, and that wasn't who I was. I told her she had no idea who I was because she'd never bothered to find out. She'd been too busy managing Tristan's image and maintaining her own social status to notice what was actually happening in my life. She said that wasn't fair and she'd always loved both her sons equally. I asked her to name one time in the last 6 years she defended me to Tristan. One time she'd told him to back off or be kinder. She couldn't. Then she got to her real agenda. She asked how much it would cost to make this right. Like there was a dollar amount that would fix 6 years of disrespect. I asked what she meant, and she said clearly I needed something or I wouldn't be putting pressure on the restaurant lease. So, what would it take for me to back off and let Tristan's career stabilize? I told her nothing was for sale and this wasn't a negotiation. I was a landlord making business decisions about my property. If that impacted Tristan's work situation, that was between him and his boss. She said I knew exactly what I was doing, and pretending this was just business was dishonest. I said pretending 6 years of mockery was just family teasing was also dishonest, but that hadn't stopped any of them. She got frustrated then, and said I was twisting everything and making this more complicated than it needed to be. That all families have dynamics and not everything is personal, and sometimes people just need to be the bigger person. I asked her why I always had to be the bigger person, why I had to absorb the hits and move past it while Tristan got to do whatever he wanted without consequences. She said that wasn't what she meant and I was being deliberately difficult. I told her this meeting was over and got out of my own car to let her know I was serious. She sat there for a minute before getting out and telling me I was making a huge mistake and I'd regret letting pride destroy my family relationships. I watched her drive away and felt absolutely nothing. No guilt, no regret, no satisfaction, just nothing, which somehow felt worse than anger. Saturday, I met Lila at this restaurant near the business district. Not a coffee shop, an actual upscale lunch place which told me she was taking this seriously. She was already there when I arrived, had already ordered water and was looking at the menu like she did this every day. She probably did. We did the small talk thing while ordering, and then she got straight to it. She said she'd been impressed with my real estate portfolio and had heard through the business association that I was looking to expand. She had some properties she was considering divesting from and thought we might have mutual interests. All very professional, very businesslike. I asked her directly if Faith knew about this meeting. She said Faith knew she was meeting with me but didn't know the details. I asked if this was actually about business or if this was about the situation with Tristan. She smiled and said it could be about both things. That's when I knew this woman was way sharper than I'd given her credit for. She explained that she and her husband had been helping Faith and Tristan with their mortgage because Faith asked them to. But that help came with expectations about how they conducted themselves and who they associated with. She said learning about the Steakhouse incident had been disappointing because it showed a lack of judgment and class. She said watching how they'd handled the aftermath had been even more disappointing because it showed a lack of character. I asked where this was going. She said her husband was a partner in a commercial development firm, and they had several properties that might interest me. But more importantly, they had connections to several business owners who were looking for reliable property managers and landlords, the kind of connections that could help someone expand their portfolio significantly. She said Faith and Tristan's behavior had created an awkward situation for her socially because people knew they were family. But if I was interested in building a professional relationship separate from family dynamics, she thought we could both benefit. So basically, Faith's mother was offering me business opportunities while implicitly threatening to cut off Faith and Tristan's mortgage help. It was elegant in a ruthless kind of way. I told her I was definitely interested in discussing business opportunities, but I needed to be clear that my decisions about my current properties weren't influenced by family relationships or social pressure. She said she wouldn't expect anything less, and that's exactly why she wanted to work with me. We spent the next hour talking actual business. She wasn't messing around. The properties she mentioned were legitimate, and the connections she offered were real. She gave me names and numbers and suggested I reach out directly with her as a reference. By the time lunch ended, we'd sketched out a potential partnership that could triple my portfolio in the next year. As we were leaving, she mentioned almost casually that she'd be having a conversation with Faith soon about financial independence and adult responsibilities. She said she'd raised her daughter to be better than what she'd seen lately, and perhaps some natural consequences would help Faith remember her values. I didn't respond to that, but we both knew what she meant. I got home Saturday afternoon and found Tristan waiting in the parking lot. Not at my door this time, actually sitting in his car like he was trying to be less aggressive about it. I parked and waited to see what he'd do. He got out and walked over but kept his distance. He asked if we could please talk for a few minutes. I said he had 5 minutes. He said his boss had given him an ultimatum: either resolve whatever issue was affecting the restaurant lease by end of business Monday, or the promotion was off the table permanently. He said his boss had made it clear that bringing personal drama into professional relationships was unacceptable, and Tristan's judgment was now in question. He said this promotion had been 2 years of work and missing it would set his career back significantly. I asked why he was telling me this. He said because I was the only one who could fix it. Because whether I wanted to admit it or not, I had the power to make this go away. I asked if he remembered having the power to not humiliate me at a restaurant and choosing to do it anyway. He said those situations weren't comparable. I said they were exactly comparable because both involved choosing to hurt someone for personal gain. He tried the brother card then, talking about how we used to be close when we were kids, how we used to have each other's backs, how family should mean something more than keeping score of who wronged who. I reminded him that I spent 8 months taking care of our father while he made excuses about being too busy. He said I'd never let that go and it wasn't fair to hold it over him forever. I told him I wasn't holding anything over him. I was just done pretending his ambition and selfishness were somehow noble while my sacrifices were pathetic. He said I was jealous of his success and always had been, that everything I'd built was just to try to compete with him, that this whole revenge thing was really just me finally having something to hold over his head. That's when I actually laughed. Not a bitter laugh, just genuine amusement. Because Tristan genuinely believed the world revolved around him. He couldn't comprehend that I'd built my business for myself, not to compete with him. That I'd structured my life around my own goals, not his shadow. That my success had nothing to do with him except that watching him mock me gave me extra motivation to prove him wrong. I told him his 5 minutes were up. He said he wasn't done. I said yes he was and walked toward my building. He followed, asking if this was really how I wanted things to end. If I was really willing to destroy his career over one bad night. I turned around and told him it wasn't one bad night. It was 6 years of bad nights and bad days and constant disrespect. Friday was just the first time there were consequences. He said I'd regret this and stormed off to his car. I watched him peel out of the parking lot like a teenager having a tantrum. Sunday, Faith started a group text with me, Tristan, and Mom. She said we needed to have a family meeting before Monday and figure this out like adults. She said she'd reserved a table at a restaurant for Sunday evening and expected everyone to be there. Mom immediately responded saying that was a good idea. Tristan sent a thumbs up. I didn't respond. Faith sent me a direct text asking if I'd seen the group message. I said yes. She said, so would I be there? I asked who was paying for this family meeting dinner. She said, what did that matter? I said because I wasn't interested in another performance where I was the audience. She said this wasn't a performance, this was a genuine attempt to resolve things. I said I'd think about it. What Faith didn't know was that her mother had texted me Sunday afternoon asking if Faith had tried to organize a family meeting. I confirmed she had. Lila said she'd suggested to Faith that they might need to have their own conversation about boundaries and consequences. But Faith had apparently decided to try fixing the family situation first. Lila said she admired the effort but doubted it would go well given everyone's current state of mind. I ended up not going to the dinner. I sent a message to the group text Sunday evening saying I had other commitments and they should enjoy their meal. Faith responded immediately saying I was being childish and refusing to meet was just proving I was more interested in drama than resolution. Mom said I was making this harder than it needed to be. Tristan didn't respond at all. Monday morning, the restaurant owner called me directly. He said he needed a decision about the lease because his partner was demanding answers. I told him I'd reviewed my portfolio and decided to increase the lease rate to current market value starting next renewal. He asked if there was any room for negotiation, and I said possibly, but I'd need time to consider what terms would make sense. He asked how much time, and I said I'd let him know. He got quiet and then asked if this was about the incident with the party Friday before last. I said I wasn't sure what incident he meant. He said his partner had mentioned there was some kind of family situation. I told him my business decisions weren't based on personal relationships, and I'd be in touch with my final offer. Monday afternoon, Tristan called me from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, he immediately started yelling about how I'd destroyed his promotion and his boss was beyond furious and his professional reputation was damaged, and all because I couldn't handle a joke. I asked if his boss had officially pulled the promotion. He said, not officially, but it was obvious it wasn't happening. I asked then why he was calling me. He said because I needed to know what I'd done, and that this wasn't over and he'd make sure everyone knew exactly what kind of person I was. I told him everyone already knew exactly what kind of person he was because he'd shown them at a steakhouse 2 weeks ago. Then I hung up. Monday night, Faith's mother sent me information about 3 properties and contact details for 4 potential business partners. All legitimate, all valuable connections. No mention of Faith or Tristan or family drama, just business. The thing that's driving them all crazy is that I'm not doing anything obviously vengeful. I'm not spreading rumors or making scenes or trying to turn people against them. I'm just making normal business decisions and living my life and letting them deal with the consequences of their own behavior. And they absolutely cannot handle that someone they viewed as beneath them now has power they can't control. Tuesday, Faith sent me a long message about how her parents were pulling their mortgage help and she and Tristan might have to sell their house, and this was all my fault for being vindictive. About how I'd won whatever game I thought I was playing, and could I please just be satisfied with that? About how family should mean more than revenge. I didn't respond, because responding would mean engaging with the narrative that I'm the villain here, and I'm not playing that role anymore. The lease decision is still pending. Tristan's promotion is still in limbo. Faith's parents are cutting them off financially. Mom is caught between trying to mediate and trying to maintain her own relationship with me. And I'm building business partnerships with people who respect competence over appearances. This still isn't over, not even close. Final update. It's been 3 weeks since my last update, and holy hell you guys were right about everything escalating. Some of you said I should just walk away and let karma handle it. To those people, karma needed some help and I was happy to provide it. This is the final update, because honestly, there's nothing left to say after this. Wednesday, after my last post, I made my official decision on the restaurant lease. Market rate increase of 42% starting at renewal, non-negotiable, with a clause that any future extensions would be evaluated annually based on current market conditions. I sent the formal offer to the restaurant owner with a 72-hour response deadline. He called me within an hour, basically begging for better terms. I told him the offer was final, and if he couldn't accept it, I had 3 other restaurants interested in the location. He asked if there was anything he could do to change my mind. Any consideration for the years he'd been a good tenant. Any flexibility given his partner's investment. I said business is business, and I'd made a fair market decision. He said his partner was going to lose a significant amount of money on this deal. I said that wasn't my problem, and perhaps his partner should have been more careful about who he associated with professionally. He got quiet and then asked directly if this was about Tristan. I told him I don't make business decisions based on personal relationships, but I also don't ignore patterns of poor judgment. That if his partner routinely entertained clients who behaved unprofessionally in public settings, perhaps that reflected on the partnership's overall decision-making. He tried to argue, but I cut him off and said my offer stood as written and I'd need his answer by Friday. Thursday morning, Faith showed up at my apartment complex at 6 a.m. I was leaving for the gym and found her sitting on the stairs outside my building. She looked like she'd been crying and hadn't slept. She asked if we could please talk before I left. I told her I had somewhere to be. She said this would only take a few minutes and it was really important. I didn't invite her inside. We stood in the parking lot while she explained that she and Tristan had spent the last 2 days looking at their finances, and the situation was worse than she'd realized. Her parents cutting off the mortgage help meant they were short almost $3,000 a month. Tristan's promotion being pulled meant the raise they'd been counting on wasn't coming. They'd run the numbers and they couldn't keep the house. They were going to have to sell, and probably at a loss because they'd need to move quickly. I asked why she was telling me this. She said because I was the only one who could fix it. If I'd just give the restaurant owner reasonable terms, Tristan's boss would back off, and maybe Tristan could salvage his promotion. If the promotion came through, they could manage the house without her parents' help. I told her that was a lot of ifs based on me making a business decision that hurt my own interests. She said I was being deliberately cruel, and I knew exactly what I was doing, that I'd planned this whole thing to destroy them financially. I told her I'd planned nothing. I'd simply stopped protecting them from the consequences of their own choices. She said that was the same thing. I said it absolutely was not the same thing, and if she couldn't see the difference, that explained a lot about why we were in this situation. Faith tried a different angle. She asked what it would take for me to forgive them. If there was some kind of restitution or apology that would make this right. I told her there was nothing she could offer that I wanted. She said everyone wants something and to just name my price. I said my price was 6 years of my life back, and since she couldn't provide that, we had nothing to discuss. She started crying then. Real tears, not manipulative ones. She said she'd never realized how much they'd hurt me, that she'd genuinely thought the teasing was normal family dynamics, that she'd seen me as someone who was okay with being the underdog because I never complained. I told her that not complaining doesn't mean not suffering, that being quiet about pain doesn't mean the pain isn't real, that she'd chosen to see what was convenient rather than what was true. She asked if there was any part of me that still cared about family, about the relationships we'd had before everything went wrong. I told her we'd never had real relationships. We'd had a dynamic where they felt superior, and I was supposed to accept being inferior. That wasn't family. That was just them needing an audience for their success story. Faith said I'd changed and become someone cold and vindictive. I told her I'd always been exactly who I am now. I just stopped pretending their behavior was acceptable. She left without another word. Friday, the restaurant owner accepted my terms. He didn't have a choice because his partner wasn't willing to invest more money to relocate, and the other restaurant options I'd mentioned were real and ready to move in. I got the signed agreement by end of business Friday. I forwarded it to Lila as a courtesy since she'd asked me to keep her informed about my business moves. She responded saying she was impressed with my negotiation approach, and we should discuss the other properties soon. Friday evening, Tristan's boss called me directly. I have no idea how he got my number, but I assume the restaurant owner provided it. He introduced himself and said he wanted to discuss the lease situation. I told him there was nothing to discuss as the lease was finalized. He said he understood I was upset about something that happened at his restaurant, and he wanted to make it right. I asked what exactly he thought happened. He said there was some kind of family disagreement that got out of hand. I told him that was an interesting characterization of his employee and business partners using a business dinner to publicly mock a family member. He got defensive and said he'd had too much to drink and didn't remember making any inappropriate comments. I said that was exactly the kind of judgment issue that made me cautious about business relationships. He tried to position it as everyone just having a good time and maybe some jokes going too far. I asked if he'd feel the same way if someone at that dinner had been mocking him, if his employees had been laughing about his failures or embarrassments for public entertainment. He said that wasn't the same situation. I told him it was exactly the same situation and his inability to see that was concerning. He said he'd like to meet in person to discuss this professionally. I told him we were discussing it professionally right now, and the lease terms were final. He said surely there was some accommodation we could reach. I asked what he was offering. He stumbled around for a bit before admitting he'd been hoping I'd be willing to reconsider based on maintaining a good business relationship. I told him I was maintaining a good business relationship by offering fair market terms. He got frustrated and said I was making this personal when it should be business. I said I was making it business, which is why I was charging market rate instead of the discount his investment had been exploiting. He asked if I realized this would impact Tristan's career. I asked if he realized Tristan's behavior had already impacted his own career by demonstrating poor judgment and unprofessional conduct. He ended the call without responding. Saturday, Lila and I met at a property she was considering selling. It was a 3-unit commercial building in a developing area with solid tenants and room for appreciation. We walked through it together and she explained her reasoning for divesting. She and her husband were restructuring their portfolio and wanted to focus on larger developments. She thought this property would be perfect for someone looking to expand methodically. We talked numbers and terms and she was straightforward about everything. No games, no hidden agendas, just business. At one point, she mentioned that Faith had called her Thursday night asking if she'd reconsider the mortgage help. Lila had told Faith that financial assistance was contingent on demonstrated maturity and responsibility, and recent events had shown neither. Faith had apparently gotten angry and said Lila was choosing me over her own daughter. Lila had responded that she wasn't choosing anyone. She was simply applying consequences to choices. I asked if that was difficult for her given Faith was her daughter. She said it would be more difficult to watch Faith continue believing that poor behavior could be solved with money, that she and her husband had enabled Faith and Tristan's lifestyle without requiring them to build real financial stability, that this situation had made her realize they'd done Faith a disservice by protecting her from consequences. We finalized the property deal that afternoon. I bought the building with terms that worked for both of us, and she introduced me to 2 of her business contacts who had additional properties available. By the end of the weekend, I'd expanded my portfolio by 4 buildings and had commitments for 3 more by end of quarter. Monday morning, Tristan showed up at my apartment again. This time he had Mom with him. I saw them from my window and almost didn't answer, but I figured we might as well finish this. I opened the door and they both immediately started talking over each other. I told them one at a time or neither of them. Mom went first. She said they'd come to tell me that Tristan's promotion had been officially rescinded, that his boss had made it clear Tristan's judgment was in question and his professional reputation was damaged, that they were listing their house this week because they couldn't afford the payments, that Faith's relationship with her parents was fractured, that our family was falling apart, and that all of this could have been avoided if I'd just been willing to forgive and move forward. I asked if she was finished. She said yes. I asked if she understood that none of what she just described was my fault. She said I'd had the power to prevent it and chose not to. I told her I'd had the power to enable their behavior and chose not to. That there's a difference between causing harm and refusing to prevent natural consequences. Tristan finally spoke up. He said he'd been thinking about that night at the steakhouse and he could see now that it was wrong, that he'd been drinking and showing off and he'd crossed a line, that he was genuinely sorry for humiliating me and he wanted to try to rebuild our relationship. I asked what had changed. Why, after 6 years of consistent disrespect, he was suddenly sorry. He admitted it was because of the consequences, but said that didn't make the apology less real. I told him yes, it absolutely made the apology less real. That being sorry because you got caught isn't the same as being sorry because you understand what you did wrong. That he'd had 6 years to realize he was treating me badly, and he'd never once considered it until it cost him something. He said people make mistakes and deserve second chances. I asked where my second chance was when I dropped out of school to take care of Dad. Where was my grace when I was rebuilding from nothing? Where was the benefit of doubt when they were all assuming I was a failure? Mom tried to mediate, saying we were both hurt and both had valid feelings and couldn't we try family counseling or something to work through this? I told her I wasn't interested in working through anything, that I'd spent 6 years being the bigger person and absorbing their judgment and I was done, that they wanted forgiveness because it was convenient for them, not because they'd actually changed. Tristan said I was holding on to anger and it was poisoning me, that I needed to let go for my own well-being. I laughed at that. I told him my well-being had never been better, that I'd built a successful business while he was busy mocking me, that I had real professional relationships based on competence while his career was imploding because of his character, that I slept fine at night knowing I'd never treated anyone the way he'd treated me. Mom said I was being cruel, and this wasn't who I was. I asked how she would know who I was when she'd never bothered to find out. When she'd spent 6 years managing Tristan's image instead of seeing me as a whole person. When she'd participated in diminishing me at that restaurant instead of defending me. She said she'd made mistakes, but she was still my mother and deserved respect. I told her respect is earned, not owed, and she'd spent 6 years earning exactly what she was getting now. Tristan tried one more time. He said regardless of the past, we were still brothers, and that should mean something. I told him it meant I knew exactly who he was, that I'd watched him choose his ego over family repeatedly, that I'd seen him use me as a prop for his success story. That blood relation doesn't obligate me to accept abuse. They both left looking defeated. Mom tried to hug me on the way out, and I stepped back. That probably hurt her more than anything I'd said. Tuesday, Faith sent me a final message. She said they'd accepted an offer on their house and would be moving within 60 days, that they were downsizing significantly, and Tristan was looking at job opportunities outside his current firm, that her relationship with her parents was probably irreparable, that she hoped I was happy with the destruction I'd caused. I didn't respond. Wednesday, Lila and I signed the paperwork on the 3-unit building, and she formally introduced me to her husband, Eugene, who runs the commercial development firm. Eugene was impressed with my portfolio growth and offered me opportunities on 2 upcoming projects. We're meeting next month to discuss partnership structures. I ran into the restaurant owner at a business association meeting Thursday. He was professional but distant. His partner, Tristan's boss, wasn't there. Someone mentioned the partnership was under strain due to financial disagreements. I didn't ask for details. Here's where we are now. Tristan lost his promotion permanently. He's interviewing at other firms, but his reputation in the industry is damaged because word travels about why he lost the promotion. Faith and Tristan sold their house at a loss and moved into a rental that's about a third of the space. Faith's parents have maintained their distance and their financial boundaries. Mom is caught between loyalty to Tristan and the realization that she enabled his behavior for years. My business has tripled in value. I have partnerships with people who respect competence and professionalism. I've established myself in the commercial real estate community as someone reliable and strategic. And I did it all without compromising my standards or accepting their treatment. Some of you said I should forgive them and move on. That holding on to anger would hurt me more than them. But here's the thing. I'm not holding on to anger. I'm holding on to standards. I'm holding on to self-respect. I'm holding on to the understanding that people who treat you badly don't deserve access to your success. They wanted me to be their cautionary tale, the loser brother who proved their success by comparison. Instead, I became the person who showed them that you don't get to treat people like garbage without consequences. That sometimes the person you're mocking is building something you'll never understand. That underestimating people based on appearances is a fundamental failure of character. Tristan sent me a message last night asking if I'd ever be willing to talk again. I read it and deleted it without responding. Because there's nothing left to say. They showed me exactly who they were for 6 years. I'm just showing them exactly who I am. And the person I am doesn't have room for people who needed me to fail so they could feel successful. To everyone who said this was about revenge, you're wrong. Revenge implies I did something to hurt them. I didn't hurt them. I just stopped protecting them from themselves. I just stopped being their safety net while they used me as their punching bag. I just stopped accepting that their success required my humiliation. This is about consequences. About teaching people that you can't treat others as less than and expect them to keep you standing when gravity finally catches up. They're still family technically, but family isn't just biology. It's respect and consideration and basic human decency. And they failed at all 3 for 6 years straight. So yeah, I came to that steakhouse where my brother was hosting his promotion dinner. I sat at the bar and watched them perform. I heard every joke, every laugh, every word designed to make me feel small. And I smiled and left without a word. Because I'd already won. They just didn't know it yet. Now they do.